Tendai moved carefully, his steps soft against the dry, cracked earth as he followed Gogo Mavis into the night. The moon hung low, casting only a weak glow over Mukaradzi, its light struggling against the thick, ever-present dust that clung to the air. He kept his distance, crouching low behind a pile of large broken stones, his breath slow and measured. He couldn't risk being seen. Up ahead, the abandoned mine shaft loomed like the gaping mouth of something ancient and forgotten. Its rusted beams jutted out like skeletal fingers, twisted and bent over time. The place had long been avoided, whispered about, feared. And yet, here was Gogo Mavis, walking straight toward it, a black sack slung over her shoulder. Tendai watched as she slowed her steps, her head tilting slightly as if listening for something. He stiffened. Did she hear him? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine, but she didn't stop. She continued forward, disappearing into the dim glow of a fire flickering just beyond the mine's entrance. Tendai inched closer, moving silently until he saw them. 3 men stood near the fire. Not just any men, mine security guards. Their uniforms were crumpled, their boots caked in dust, their faces unreadable. These weren't the kind of men who kept people safe. These were the kind of men who made sure the wrong questions were never asked. One of them, a tall man with a deep scar cutting across his cheek, stepped forward as Gogo Mavis approached. She didn't speak. Instead, she let the black sack slip from her shoulder, dropping it at his feet. The sack hit the ground with a dull thud. Tendai's stomach twisted. The scarred guard pushed the sack with his boot. The cloth moved, and a piece of clothing fell out. Gogo Mavis didn't come empty-handed. In her other hand, she carried a small covered clay pot. She placed it beside the fire, steam rising into the night air. The scent was strong, earthy, rich, almost too heavy for the cool night breeze. A bubbling pot was already cooking near the fire. One of the guards stirred it slowly. The stew inside was thick and fragrant, the kind that clung to the spoon as if it had been cooking for hours. Then, the guard crouched and untied the sack. Tendai's stomach twisted. It wasn't just clothes inside. Something else was there, something strange. It was hard to see in the dim light, but it made Tendai uneasy. His mind searched for an explanation, but none came. The scarred guard reached inside and took out something small and rusted. He turned it in his hand and lifted it toward the fire. A miner's badge. Tendai's pulse roared in his ears. These weren't just random belongings. These were the possessions of the missing miners. The scarred man studied the badge for a long moment. Then he muttered, "It looks like it was just left behind." He tossed it back into the sack. Tendai's body tensed. Just left behind? Another guard, shorter but strong, reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He flicked his hand and tossed it to Gogo Mavis. She caught it smoothly, like she had done this many times before. A faint jingle came from the pouch. Tendai did not need to look inside. He knew it was gold dust. She was being paid. But for what? Then, it happened. One of the guards turned to a 4th man standing nearby. A miner. The man's posture was stiff, his shoulders hunched, his head bowed, as if he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. The guard spoke in a flat voice. "Your turn." The miner did not move. Gogo Mavis stepped forward and handed him a bowl of hot stew. Tendai's heartbeat pounded hard. For a moment, the miner hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, he lifted the bowl to his lips. As soon as the stew touched his tongue, everything changed. The fire flickered wildly. The air grew thick, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The miner stood frozen. His eyes became distant. like he was listening to something no one else could hear. For a brief moment, the world around him blurred. Then he was gone. Not with a sound, not with a scream, just gone. Only the quiet rustle of the wind remained. Tendai felt his hands shake. His breath was shallow. This wasn't magic. It wasn't a trick. Something took him, and it was still here. Tendai could not sleep that night. His mind raced, trying to understand what he had seen. Did his eyes trick him? Did the fire play games with his vision? By morning, he was at the miners' camp. He walked through rows of tents, looking at the tired workers. He needed to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. Then he saw him, a man sitting near the edge of the mine entrance. His body was too still. The sun cast long shadows over his hunched frame. His eyes were deep and sunken, his coat tattered, and his old miner's hat was pulled low over his face. A chill ran through Tendai's body. Something about this man wasn't right. "You shouldn't have followed her," the man said, his voice raspy. Tendai stopped. His chest tightened. "What?" The man lifted his head, his gaze dark and hollow. "You think you're the first? That you just found out something new?" He gave a dry chuckle. Mukaradzi does not let people go once they know too much. Tendai's heart pounded. "Who are you?" The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a rusted miner's badge. He tossed it to Tendai. Tendai looked at it. The name was hard to read, but he could still make it out. Jonasi Tembo, senior miner. Mukaradzi mines. Tendai's fingers trembled. "Jonasi Tembo? But you were reported missing years ago." Jonasi stared at him. "Was I?" he whispered. Then, he disappeared. Tendai jumped back, his breath fast. Jonasi Tembo had been there, but he was not alive. Tendai needed answers. That evening, he pushed through the old mine office's rusted doors, a crumbling building that had long been abandoned. Dust filled the air, swirling around him as he moved. Old ledgers and papers were scattered across a desk, their edges eaten away by time. He rummaged through decades-old files, searching for something, anything that could explain what he had seen. Then, he found it. A photograph. A group of miners stood side by side, covered in dust, staring into the camera. Jonasi Tembo was there, but so was Tendai, his own face, his own eyes, staring back at him from a photo dated May 17th, 1895. Tendai's stomach lurched. This wasn't possible. He wasn't even born in 1895. That evening, Tendai rushed into Gogo Mavis's restaurant. His hands shook as he placed the old photo on the table. "What am I?" His voice was barely a whisper. She did not look surprised. "You found it then." A deep voice spoke. "Because some people never leave Mukaradzi." Tendai turned quickly. A tall man in a perfect suit walked in. His shoes were clean, even in the dusty air. His presence commanding. Tendai recognized him instantly. The mine owner. "Boss," Tendai whispered. "You're behind this." The man smirked. "The mine remembers those who belong to it. Some footsteps never fade." His voice was smooth and calm. "You were never supposed to leave." The mine owner's voice was steady, almost sad. "The mine does not forget its own." Tendai's mind spun. Gogo Mavis placed a bowl of hot stew in front of him. He looked at the surface of the stew. His reflection was missing. "Eat, child," she said softly. "You are not like them." Tendai clenched his jaw. "Why am I not disappearing like the others?" Gogo Mavis sighed. "Because you disappeared long ago." The mine owner stepped closer and placed a rusted miner's badge in front of Tendai. Tendai picked it up. His name was engraved on it. His hands shook. "No," he whispered. "You disappeared long ago. the mine owner said simply. You were never meant to leave. Tendai's head spun, his vision blurred. In the distance, the mine's siren wailed. Not from today, from 1895. The memories came in pieces, broken and unclear, like echoes of another life. His name on the badge felt too familiar. Had he always been here? Or was the mine rewriting his past? Thank you for watching. If you liked this story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share with family and friends, turn on notifications so you never miss more exciting folk tales. More mysterious and thrilling stories are coming your way. Stay tuned.